Does Tylenol cause autism? Well, we got to interview a PhD neuroscientist who literally did his dissertation on autism.
Let's go. Dr. Ben, you've probably seen him on TikTok. He is a social media scientist, or not social media scientist, he's a science communicator. And he also just wrote a book on human connection, social connection, which is helping us bridge this divided nation and world that we're in at the current moment and giving neuroscience and actual tools and tactics to do so. So it's a wild episode. We had a great time with him. Let's dive in.
Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Decision Lab podcast. And today we are thrilled to have on Dr. Ben Rhine, an award-winning neuroscientist and author of Why Brains Need Friends, with over 1 million followers on social media. Welcome to the pod. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. This has been a long time coming. We've had this planned for months.
Oh yeah, maybe more. I mean, it's like been sort of planned, right? Like soft planned for like years, I want to say. So here we are.
Dude, first thing I want to ask you is how you doing, man? I know you got this book launch coming up. Like, how's life right now? Like, you breathing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's a podcast question I haven't yet gotten. I'm all right. I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, the unconventional thing about my book launch is I have many roles in life, but some of the more important ones are I am an author, and the book comes out obviously October 14th. Then I am the chief science officer of the Mind Science Foundation based in Texas. We have a big event every year. That event this year happens to be October 15th. So I have a very intense week there. And then I'm also a human being and a husband, and my wife is pregnant and she's due with our first child October 29th. So I have the confluence of the three largest things. Two of them are probably the biggest things I've ever had to deal with in my life in the same month. And then you throw in all the other stuff of the Mind Science Foundation and everything else. So it's a lot, I'm hanging on, but I don't know. I feel it's a gift. I am exhausted. I have taken, I think, 14 flights in the last 2 weeks. Just it's tiring, but I also know that a year from now, 2 years from now, I'm going to look, maybe 20 years, 50 years from now, I'm going to look back at this time in my life and say, that was a time unlike any other. And what a gift it is to have all of these amazing things happening at the same time, even though it may be, a bit of a pull and stretch to my bandwidth. So hanging in there, doing pretty well.
Dude, that is so much all at once. You're so right. It's all the huge things people do in their lives, just all back to back to back. That's insane. I can't even believe it.
Yeah. And soon it's going to be, sorry, what's that?
I was just saying you might have a kid on Halloween or close to it too. That's my favorite holiday. That'd be cool.
As long as I don't have a kid while I'm in Texas for the event, that's my big fear. So I'm just waiting until once I get back from that event in Texas. I live in New York. That's when it is going to be, I'm going to feel a lot better because I'm obviously horrified that my wife's going to go into labor while I'm not in town. So there's a lot of anxiety around that, as you can imagine, but I'm just trying to be optimistic. The baby would be coming 2 weeks early if that happens. So just cross your fingers for me and hope that the baby comes on time.
Got it. We'll cross our fingers. We're all hoping for the best on this. That's awesome. Can't imagine how stressful that is. I'm glad you've got some perspective on it though, and can look into the future and be like, I think I'm going to look back at this and be like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. And also, honestly, come November, the book will be out. The event in Mind Science will be over. The baby will be here, and I will be laying on my couch, completely sleep deprived, experiencing the largest oxytocin surge of my entire life, and just feeling whatever I'll be feeling at that time. Probably exhausted, probably irritable, and probably very grateful. So I'm excited for that next stage.
I love it. Do you look at something like birth thinking about, is there a way that you look at it without the science, just as a dad as well? Or is the science just interweaved in there?
I think the science is interweaved into everything I see in life, this is not a plug to my book, although it's going to sound like it, and I guess it will be effectively. But the reason I wrote my book is because I see our social world, our social lives, our daily interactions through the lens of being a neuroscientist who studies social behavior. And so when it's we are in a loneliness epidemic, and I'm seeing all these statistics of social contact going down, isolation going up, all these indicators going in the wrong direction, that felt completely different to me, given my perspective from this neuroscience lens, than the average person. And I wanted to write a book that would kind of expose that perspective and be like, look, this is why this actually matters. This is why brains need friends. That's what the title of the book is. And so, and the reason I say all that, again, not trying to plug my book, But that's genuinely how I'm realizing more and more. That's how I think about a lot of things. And it's pretty much everything. Like the empirical method, the scientific method can be applied to like basically everything. And you just can't help your knowledge and your training shifting the way you see the world. I think it happens to everybody, right? So like a plumber is probably going to try to fix a problem with the tools a plumber uses, right? Whereas like a painter is going to want to like cover it up with paint and make it aesthetically beautiful, right? Like we all have different approaches, and mine happens to be neuroscience. So yeah, when it comes to the baby, I mean, I'm definitely thinking about the biology, and I talk a bit about the biology in the book too. So it's like kind of fresh. I just wrote those sections pretty recently. So definitely all wrapped up in neuroscience.
Hell yeah. We'll get there. We're gonna talk a little bit about the book. Before we do though, like I would just be so curious to understand how you got fascinated with neuroscience, just in general. Not everyone becomes a neuroscientist. Like, yeah. Where did it start for you?
It started really young. Well, when I was in elementary school is when I realized that I was interested in behavior, and specifically social behavior. I would literally remember looking around my cafeteria and seeing some tables of students that were really, really like outgoing and rambunctious and loud and energetic, and other tables that were the total opposite, really quiet. Everyone's reading, or eating their, just looking at their sandwiches. No one's looking at each other, right? And I thought, wow, how interesting is it that we're all different, and why, right? Like, what's going on here? But I wasn't thinking about the brain. I was thinking about who we are and our identities and personalities. So when I got to college, I started studying psychology, hoping to study this, right? Kind of the psychology of introversion and extroversion, I guess. And then partway through my studies, I had my doubts about whether psychology was the right field for me. I felt like I was more interested in neuroscience, but I was super intimidated by neuroscience. I thought that it was terrifying and I would never make it through the, genetics and molecular biology and biochemistry and all that. So I stayed in psychology mostly out of fear. And then in my second year, I had a horrifying nightmare that legitimately changed my life. And if you want, I could tell you about the dream, but just for the sake of brevity, I'll leave it out. Basically, I woke up that day and decided I cannot ignore this feeling in me that tells me that I want to study the brain. And it was actually the dream itself and the experience of being immersed in this virtual, I guess you'd call it virtual environment, right? This dreamscape where there's all these vivid elements. We have characters who make decisions. There's dialogue. I'm interacting with the characters. There's a storyline. I have this sort of agency that I can move about the dream and seemingly make decisions and all this. And the world changes around me and it's horrifying and it's tailored to my fears. And I woke up and realized that's unbelievable that my brain was just doing that. Like, how did my brain just preserve this sense of consciousness that I'm like moving about in this dream while also generating everything around me? This organ is unbelievable. I need to study how this organ works. It's not behavior, it's the machine. And that's where I switched, like literally that day, I switched to neuroscience and never looked back. And I was lucky enough to directly go from undergrad to a PhD in neuroscience. And then in my PhD, was able to study the neurobiology of autism. So I got to sort of answer this, scratch that itch that I had since elementary school, right? Like, why are we different? Why are we all different socially? What brain systems guide that? And then I went on to Stanford for a postdoc where I studied empathy and specifically how MDMA, the drug also known as Molly, enhances empathy. That wasn't necessarily because I was interested in MDMA, although it is interesting. The deeper question is, can the brain systems, like in studying autism, I was able to see the brain systems that drive social behavior can be altered in a way that makes us less social. Can the brain systems that drive empathy be altered in a way that makes us more empathic? And how might that be so that maybe we could develop drugs that enhance empathy for conditions like psychopathy or something like that, where it could be useful? And we got some really clear answers on both of those things through the research that I did. So it's been a fun journey. And I guess it all started with a nightmare in elementary school.
That's awesome. I've never heard a story like that. Something I'm curious about is, and some people might not know this, but when you get a PhD, you're studying something extraordinarily specific. Like you go deep on something. But how do you go from everything that the brain is and could be and that you could study and all these questions to your specific, the thing that you chose? Like, how did you get to that specific thing you did your PhD on?
Well, truthfully, in my PhD, the decision was not mine. It was my supervisors, because I came in as a PhD student and let's be real, I didn't know shit. And so my advisor, who really knows this field very well, was like, this is going to be your project. And I said, okay, sounds good. As long as you think this is sensible to study. And it was. And so she was the one making that decision. So I can answer it kind of from her perspective. We were looking at the genetics of autism, and it's known that there's a bunch of different causes of autism, and many of them are genetic, or a lot of autism cases are genetic. And then there are others that are like environmental and things like that. But when it comes to the genetic factors, it's well known that there are some genes that are genetic mutations, or when the gene sequence is changed, if that happens to a person, they're much more likely to be diagnosed with autism, and they show social changes in social behaviors. And so that was kind of the question. It was like, okay, this gene sequence changing somehow makes people behave differently in social settings. How is that happening? So what we would do is we would pick one of those genes, which, by the way, there are like 1,000 associated with autism. It's a very complicated condition. That's why it's a spectrum. But we'd pick one, and we would say, all right, what's going on here, right? So the genetic variable I was looking at, to make matters even more complicated and frustrate listeners, it wasn't one gene. It was a section of chromosome 16. It was called position 11.2, which doesn't matter. It was like a stretch of 27 genes on chromosome 16. And it was sometimes duplicated, so you'd have twice as many genes as you need, or it'd be deleted, where you have all these genes missing, 27 genes. And a good analogy is like trisomy 21, Down syndrome, right? You have this chromosome 21. When there's an additional chromosome, it produces these characteristic effects that we know as Down syndrome. So I was studying the duplication of this one little section of chromosome 16. And so what we would do to study this is we would duplicate that chromosome, or that section of the chromosome, in mice, and then we would study their brains. And we would look at what's going on in the brain. Can we basically identify the thread that connects this genetic change to whatever difference in brain function is happening? And then can we connect that difference in brain function to the change in behavior? And so what we ended up doing is zooming in on the prefrontal cortex, a pretty well-known brain area, and we found that there was changes in signaling between the neurons, synapses, the junctions between cells where neurotransmitters are released and all this communication happens between cells. We found that there were basically changes in the way the cells were communicating, and those mice were also interacting less with each other. So sounds similar, reminiscent of autism. So what we did is we actually went in and basically asked the question, if we restore the synaptic transmission, the way the cells are interacting, if we restore it to what is typically seen, does that reverse the changes in the social behaviors? And it did. So we found that by altering the neural communication, the mice became more social, which, this could go on a massive tangent, but we only did that experiment to see is this change we noticed responsible for the social differences? But in finding that restoring that brain function can enhance social interaction, it naturally opens the door to, well, could this be a potential treatment mechanism for autism spectrum disorder? And that happens a lot in mice, and it almost never translates to humans. Like, you'd be shocked. There's probably, I'm just completely guessing, but I would bet in the last year, there have probably been 25 to 30 papers published where autism was cured in mice, air quotes, cured, and that the mice became more social after some brain manipulation. And I can promise that probably none of those will translate to humans, unfortunately, but it does uncover a bit more about how the condition works. So anyway, sorry, you asked me how I got to what I studied, and I just told you my entire PhD thesis. So sorry for going a little overboard on that.
No, it's okay. I prefer it, honestly. And it's interesting because there's some interesting things happening in the world today in relation to autism, and you seem to be the perfect person to talk to.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about autism during your research?
Gosh, I mean, I learned a lot. Gosh, probably the biggest, like, whoa, this is nuts moment was when I did those experiments that I actually just described, where I did something you would never do to a human being. I injected a virus into the prefrontal cortex of these mice in order to increase the expression of a certain protein, so that protein could then go over to synapses and cause a change in the way the cells signal. And I thought, there's no way this is going to do anything. Like, I literally did a brain surgery on a mouse, hoping to God it works, based on just theory. And then I put them into a behavioral test where they have the choice between interacting with an inanimate object or another mouse. And mouse after mouse after mouse, they were super social, even though before the surgery, they were not social at all. And that moment of, like, I just altered this mouse's neurochemistry in a way that makes it want to interact more. That was like the most mind-blowing thing. And it's funny because those moments happen, you expect, you might picture like a team of scientists like rejoicing and popping a bottle of champagne, but it's actually me sitting in this dark, crummy academic building in a room with the lights off with the mice, and there's no humans around, and I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy. But again, no one's tested my approach in humans. There's ways to do it without having to inject a virus, by the way. That's just the way it's done in animal studies because it's the fastest and most efficient way to do it. But yeah, no one's tested that in humans, and I don't know if it would make sense in humans. But anyways, I think that maybe all of that is my biggest learning, that like my biggest surprise, that like, whoa, you can actually change behavior by changing neurochemistry, and then it might not even mean anything for humans though, just to say. But another learning I had is when I started talking about that finding on social media, 5 years ago. And I thought people were going to be like, wow, this is unbelievable. And a lot of people were. But then there were a lot of people who were like, it is disgusting of you to even propose that my autism or my son's autism or my friend's autism should be cured. And I was like, whoa, like, first off, I never even said that. Like, that's not the intention. The intention of this experiment was not to identify a cure for autism. It was to just mechanistically show that the changes we saw in the brain were responsible for the behavioral changes. That's the whole purpose of doing mouse research. That's the only reason we're doing this in mice, because if we wanted just correlations, we could do that in humans. We could take human beings, put them in brain scanners and see, oh, look, there's a change in this brain area. And they also show this social change. That's a correlation, but we don't know it's responsible. In mice, we can reverse the brain function that we're noticing and test whether it alters the behavior. So that's the whole purpose. But that doesn't necessarily suggest that I think autism should be like eradicated. And that's how people perceive it, or some people did. And that taught me a lot. That made me really understand the autism community on a whole new level, where it was like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's a lot of people who are diagnosed with autism who are perfectly content with being autistic, and also are probably sick of hearing people like RFK Jr. say things like, if you have autism, we have the cure, and, don't take Tylenol, and it's terrible when these people have autism. Like, this is the language that's used in the public sector around autism a lot. And I've become aware of that. And so I try whenever I can to sort of pass that learning on, where it's like, I can't even imagine what it would be like if someone was trying to tell me all the time that the way I am needs to be changed medically. And to be sure, there are people who actually do want treatments, but not everybody. And so the language is really sensitive, and the way it's approached is really sensitive. And I am now sensitive to that. So it's even more frustrating also to see kind of the discourse that's happening right now around autism. And there's a lot going on.
Yeah, more on the Tylenol thing in a second. Something that I'm curious about, though, is the mice. Something that's always pissed me off a little bit, if I'm just being for real. This animal study versus human study, and it's like, okay, why, to the average consumer, could you help them understand why the fuck do we do these animal studies if all scientists say is, well, it's an animal study, so we can't really do it, and 97% or whatever the stat is of animal studies don't translate to humans, and all this stuff. Like, what the hell? Why? Yeah. Help me understand that.
I mean, I kind of already said it. It's that by doing experiments in animals, we can get more clear answers, right? Like, if you take let's take autism out of it. Let's look at Parkinson's. Okay. So Parkinson's, it's a neurodegenerative disorder. It's a movement disorder. So let's say you have human patients. They have Parkinson's, and they're struggling to move. They're struggling to initiate movement. You put them in a brain scanner, and it's like, oh, look at this brain area called the substantia nigra is less active. Interesting. It's reliable across all these patients. So there may be something going on with the substantia nigra. All right, how can we change that, right? It's like, well, we know that the substantia nigra, receives inputs from neurons that produce serotonin and dopamine and GABA and glutamate. And, and by the way, I don't even know if that's true. I'm making this up. So let's try giving these Parkinson's patients a drug that stimulates GABA release, a drug that stimulates dopamine release, a drug that stimulates serotonin release, right? And it's like, we can go through all these countless clinical trials, taking real human beings and exposing them to drugs that likely will not help and also may exacerbate the problem. We don't know. Or we can go into mice and we can say, all right, hey, let's get a really deep, instead of just a brain scanner telling us there's less activity, we can go in there and we can find out everything we need to know. And sure, it might not be identical to what's happening in the human brain, but it's likely that there's going to be a lot in common. And so if we go in and we find, oh, actually, it's not that the entire brain area is less active, it's that there's certain neurons that, these are the ones that are less active. And what if we go in there and we just stimulate those? That actually allows the mice to move better, but stimulating the other neurons doesn't. Well, now we've just identified something much more high resolution that we never, ever, ever would be able to do in humans. Even if we gave the people a drug and it made them feel better and made them be able to move better, we still wouldn't really understand the mechanism. And so the animal studies allow us to identify the mechanism, which also sort of begets new opportunities for drug treatments. Okay, we know that this mechanism is what needs to be done. So this drug happens to do it, but that drug also has all these side effects. So if we can find a cleaner drug that more specifically targets that mechanism, then we can have better human treatments. And so I will say, there's a lot of animal research that doesn't need to be animal research. And I think You won't hear scientists confess that often, but like sometimes there's labs that they only do animal research and they want to answer a question and they want to have an experiment in their study to make it stronger. And it would actually make way more sense to do it in humans, but they don't have the capacity to do it in humans because they don't have IRB approval. They don't have institutional approval to do studies in humans, and they don't have the ability to recruit human patients to come to the lab. So it's easier for them to just do it in mice because they have the mice accessible, and that's how they know how to do research. And so it's things like that where you end up with unnecessary use of lab animals for studies. But I don't know, it's tough. I mean, science is a business. And every researcher is an entrepreneur, and they are doing everything to support their lab and their career in a very competitive market. And so publish or perish, they say, right? You have to publish papers or your lab falls apart and you don't die, but your career dies. And it's a tough, complicated, messy circumstance. And the answers, I don't know, it's very political, right? To find the right answers, you would need everything to change. And it's kind of like if you have a political problem that would require major legislation to change and it will never pass. It's kind of like that. It's like we can try to rectify some of these issues, but it's like old problems that have been around for a long time, and a solution would be like nearly impossible unless there was like widespread simultaneous adoption, which is like almost impossible.
You have the unique lens also of being a social media like influencer, if you will, creator, like a science communicator. In this vein, you could put up a story, recruit probably thousands of human people for a study, and do like, why is that not two things? Why not? Like, or will you do that in the future? Maybe is that the future of science potentially? Like, as you like interject these two, your research and your social media side, like, have you thought about that? Like, what is your thought on that?
Oh, I could do that, but the scientist who I worked with in my PhD could not do that, right? Because she's not on social media. She has no idea how the hell it works. And most scientists they shy away from social media. And historically, social media is not a part of being a scientist, right? This is a very new thing. So right. I do think it's possible. But I mean, it's so funny because you come around, when you see both perspectives of a situation, it makes you realize that like marketing is really difficult. Let me explain what I mean. A couple of years ago, I won this research award, this grant. It was a $30,000 grant. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I'm so happy I won this. I must have been so competitive. Now I'm the chief science officer of the foundation that funded me. And part of my job is recruiting people to apply. And so it's like, you would think we're giving out $100,000 in research funding. You would think people would like flock to this opportunity and apply, but it's like, well, no, they don't unless we market it, right? We have to market this opportunity. And so the same is true with like, clinical trials, like pretty much anything. But you think, we have a new clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease. Man, think about how many people are out there with Alzheimer's that are just desperate for any new potential treatment. You launch this clinical trial and research labs will pay tens of thousands of dollars to recruit participants for these studies because marketing is difficult and getting information in front of people is difficult. So as what I've learned through like social media and all this marketing stuff is like, as wonderful of an opportunity as you have and that you are offering people for free, you often still have to like spend money and do hard work to get them to even know that it exists. And I think that's part of the problem, because I think scientists don't want to, spend money recruiting people. And it would be great if all scientists had, greater publicity to get the word out, but we don't. And that's part of the problem with science as well, that science has historically siloed itself from society, that there is no direct channel of communication between science and the public. So it's even harder to recruit participants and to, break into new human research and stuff like that.
Do you see that changing or breaking down in the future? Like, do you think there could be lots of Dr. Bens that do have social media followings, can blend both sides of it, and it's like a new fleet of scientists almost? Social media scientists, if you will?
I think we're there, actually. I think we're already there. And I do think that the younger generations of scientists are understanding this more and more. I actually teach a class at Stanford called How to Communicate Science, where David Eagleman teaches it with me, and we're trying to inspire the next generation of PhD students and researchers to consider writing public-facing articles or jumping on social media and whatnot. And there's a hearty response for it, right? These younger students want it. So I think that we are getting there, and a decade from now, or the next generation of scientists will be much more prone to using public-facing communication methods. However, I do think there's a risk that what could happen is, as you know, there are, in one of my videos, I say, I'm a scientist, not a bullshit guy. There's a lot of bullshit guys on social media. And what might happen is that the ratio of bullshit guys to actual scientists gets so disproportionately ugly that scientists start to view social media as nothing but a pit of garbage. That if for them to go in there and associate with a platform like Instagram or TikTok will make them look bad because they're dragging their own name through a mud pit of all misinformation. And if we allow it to get that bad, then I think that science could become even more siloed, where it's like, we don't affiliate with that. Like, that's where the fake scientists go. So like if you see someone on social media talking about science, they're not real because we don't use it, and that would be, that would be terrible. And in a way that's also sort of happening. So I don't know. It's a disaster. To be honest.
It is a disaster. Us humans are great at navigating those historically, I've heard too. So
yeah, we'll get through it.
How do you decide between a bullshit or a not? Like, what's your mechanism for that?
All right. First, actually, no. All it really comes down to is, what are they claiming and is it true? That's pretty much all that matters. And it starts with their credentials. I've noticed that so I work in neuroscience, so I pay attention to the neuroscience creators the most. And I've noticed that a lot of these creators in this space who don't have credentials start their videos by saying, I'm a neuroscientist. They're like, within the first 5 seconds, they pose a hook and then they're like, I'm a neuroscientist, here's the answer. And a lot of the time when you dig into that claim, the claim, I am a neuroscientist. Okay, you're a neuroscientist. That implies that you have, in my opinion, that implies that you are actively conducting scientific research, right? A scientist is a career path, right? I wouldn't say that I was a hairstylist if I did my friend's hair 5 years ago and I used to have like a little salon in my basement. I'm no longer a hairstylist, right? I used to be a hairstylist, whatever. It's a career. And so what really upsets me is when I see people who they do like an undergraduate degree, like a bachelor's in biology, and they like worked in a research lab for 60 days and are like second last author on one research paper. And they're like, I'm a neuroscientist. And it's so muddy because it's like, are you a neuroscientist? Are you not? To me, I think, and maybe this is like gatekeepy of me, but I think if you're going to go online and you're going to say you're a neuroscientist, you should have a PhD and have done a research in neuroscience, or you should be a PhD student is a neuroscientist. They are spending their career doing neuroscience research. And basically what it turns out is that all the people who say I'm a neuroscientist are not neuroscientists, by my definition, at least. So that's the first thing. Then let's get past their credentials just to what they're actually saying. It's the more loosely someone talks about a topic, the more prone they are to misrepresenting it, naturally, right? So like science communication is a difficult job because you're trying to take really, really nuanced material and make it very clear. And so in order to do that, you have to zoom out, you have to step back, and you have to explain it in a very broad, general way that leaves out a lot of the nuance and detail. And when people who really understand a topic do that, they do it well because they're representing the topic in the way that it needs to be represented, but it can also be done in a way that removes so much nuance and strays so far from the actual data that it becomes misinformation. It becomes just not true. And that's what I also look for is if a person is talking about a subject very broadly and they're just making claims, this is associated with this and that and this, whatever. Are they citing studies? Are they showing their evidence? Is it even true? Like if you just pluck out one of the claims and you do a search online, is it true what they're saying? And yeah, unfortunately, like I said, there's a lot of bullshit guys right now. There's a lot of people who, if you do that and if you fact check them, you'll find it's actually not true. And so I'm hoping that we'll have more tools that will be like online fact checkers that you can like plug a YouTube video in or TikTok video in, and it'll just transcribe the text and do like a PubMed search and say this is whether it's true or it's false, or there's parts of it that are true, there's parts of it that are false. Because right now the average person can't do that, and there's a lot of people who take advantage of the inaccessibility of the information, because if they say something and you have no way to fact check it because you cannot access scientific papers and you cannot interpret scientific papers, you are automatically going to be forced to basically believe them. And that's a dirty practice. It's a very, very dirty practice. So I have a lot of distrust on the internet because there's a lot of fake stuff.
Have you ever seen Consensus AI? Have you ever used that?
No, I've heard of it though, I think.
We use that a lot for Decision Lab and like examining claims. I use it for my own content a lot as well, but it sits on the top of PubMed and like PsycInfo and like all of these research databases and pulls only from research, and then gives you like a consensus meter. You put in a claim and it's like, this percent of research supports it, this percent doesn't, or is like it's undecided. And then it's like this research, it was a meta-analysis of 25 piece thing. This was a observational study, that whatever. And it makes it really, really simple and easy to understand some of that and like be that BS detector.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great tool.
Yeah, we use that. We use that a ton. It's interesting too, because I see this a ton. Even I fell into this as well, because I have a cognitive behavioral neuroscience undergraduate degree. That's my, like, what I have as a young undergraduate. I was like, oh yeah, I get to start. My brother has a mechanical engineering degree. He's an engineer. I have a neuroscience degree. I'm a neuroscientist. And I quickly realized that that's not how the rest of the scientific community looks at it. So I try to say I have a degree, or I don't try, I do say I have a degree in cognitive neuroscience, as opposed to the hook of I am a neuroscientist. Because I see that a lot too. And I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I had,
sorry, I'm not going to say any names, but there are some like really bad offenders of this that are like, they have massive audiences, and every single video they remind you, hi, I'm this person and I'm a neuroscientist. And, you know, they're not. They're just simply not a neuroscientist. And it's concerning, because when you say to the general public, I'm a neuroscientist, people are like, wow, okay, well, you know what you're talking about. What are you going to say? Mm-hmm. And then you say, take this supplement because it'll reduce the chances of you getting dementia. There's a link in my bio. And you're like, okay, well, this guy's a freaking neuroscientist. I'm going to buy his stuff, right? But then I'm trying to be very cautious here, but I've heard of scenarios where people like that have been actually have gone to court because other people have said, you're actually not a neuroscientist. And they reply, that's defamation. I am a neuroscientist. And then in court, they argue that they are a neuroscientist because for a career, they study the neuroscience. They read the literature and they talk about it online. And so they are studying neuroscience by reading about it online. And that makes them a neuroscientist. And that's like literally argued in court. And so it's horrifying. It's completely horrifying, because it's like, I could just go online and be like, I'm an astronaut. And then someone sues me, and if someone says something wrong about me, I can sue them. Like, what is going on? And this is just like, what's so terrifying about the world right now is that we have truth decay. We are losing our sense of what is true. And it used to be very obvious that it was like, what's true? Well, it's whatever the evidence says, right? And now we can point to evidence and say that evidence is biased. That evidence is flawed. I saw that evidence on the news station I don't trust, and therefore it's fake. And this is where things are just getting so incredibly terrifying, because when we have a nation that is led not by data and evidence, but by opinions, we dramatically fall behind and rapidly fall behind other nations that do follow data and do follow evidence. Because if you have a military that the evidence says we are much weaker than other militaries, but the president says our military is the strongest military in the world, and you believe that person, like, this is a problem, right? And military is a clear example, because like there's significant repercussions, but also how about medicine, right? When we have people dying of conditions and saying certain medications are the cure and they're not, and people start taking them, and then people start dying because they're not taking the right medications. Like the repercussions are astronomical. And how do you even approach a topic like this? How do you even fix a situation when people don't know what's real anymore? That is so scary and dystopian, and something I think about way too often for my own well-being.
I feel you. I mean, that's at the heart of why we started this show. I mean, we have literally had founders on that call themselves doctors or like this claim they have PhDs, and we start to ask them, okay, well, like, what was your research on? What was your dissertation? Like, and well, I didn't do a dissertation. I didn't really do research. And this was in the Cayman Islands that I got this. And I was just like, what? And so to me, it's like, for the answer for us is like, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this and like really let people determine for themselves in a way, but by asking like really, really intense questions and stuff like that. So, but I agree with you. It is, it's the Wild West out there. It's scary. And I'm in the mental health space too. So sometimes it's not even just, mental health claims are even crazier, because that more of what I do is as a trauma therapist anyways. Like I bring in a ton of neuroscience into what I do when I see patients. And there's just a lot that you can do to really, especially in the trauma space, that messes people up worse. So it's just like, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's documented cases of where the harm falls, right? Like for instance, when it comes to cancer treatment, right? We know that chemotherapy is the gold standard. It's not perfect by any means. It has obviously severe side effects. But if you're trying to improve the likelihood of survival, chemotherapy is the best option. But there are a lot of people on social media who say chemotherapy is just, poison. And if you want to really survive, you should do this or that, get a sauna, take this supplement, natural therapies. And there's like literally published evidence on this topic showing that like many people have died because they have listened to social media over their doctors. And there was a very recent case where a woman died because she was doing coffee enemas because that's what social media suggested, and not doing chemotherapy. And it's like,
we just did a video on this. I am so passionate about how stupid coffee enemas are. Like, I'm sorry. Like,
yeah,
I didn't know that though.
Like this, there are real people. It's so scary that the incentive for someone to make content that is sensational and is whatever, catches on with someone, right, gives a person hope. The incentive is so high because you get more followers, you get more views, you get more money, you get more opportunities, that those people will do that at the expense of literal lives. And surely they're not like, oh, I'm killing people on purpose, right? Like, they probably think coffee enemas actually work. That's probably why they're sharing it so much. But like, it's just nerve-wracking because when you lose trust in data, then you lose trust in authority, right? Because you lose trust in expertise. You have doctors who go to medical school so that when you see the doctor, they can answer your question because they know about the human body. And if you start to distrust your doctor and start to listen to social media, I mean, there are consequences, and it's very worrying.
You study social behavior, and we continue to say social media. Why do brains who are on social media, why does this happen? How do we get to this place? Like, with your lens on social behavior, how is this a thing? Because if you say this, you're like, that makes no sense. Why would you ever listen to social media over a doctor? Like, what the hell? But it happens. So what's the brain thing? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there are parts of it that are social, obviously, right? So like, you're scrolling on Instagram, let's say, and you're receiving social information. You have a person posted, they just had a kid. You have a person posting, they just bought a house. You have a person posting, their grandmother just died, right? Like, or you have a person posting, here's what my body looks like in a bikini, right? You have all this social information that's coming to you, and that information is valuable because we are social animals. We survive best in social environments. We care a lot about our social experience on Earth. So when you have a platform that allows you to just gather and harvest social information without having to actually like do any work, there's a natural appeal to it. Then you start mixing in, here's a video of, a cheetah running top speed and chasing down an animal, whatever they chase down, and here's a video of people fighting. And that's really emotional as well. And you have just this nonstop, literally, this is like an operant chamber for a mouse. You have a mouse that can press a lever. And if you have a mouse in a chamber that when they press the lever, they receive a zap to their brain's dopamine centers. So nothing actually happens. It just drives dopamine release. They will just sit there and just press that lever over and over and over. And it's very reminiscent to what's happening when someone is swiping on social media and just over and over. Is this going to hit my dopamine center? A little bit. Is this one? Oh, this one's great. Is this one? That's all we're doing. Also very similar to pulling sitting at a slot machine and just pulling the lever over and over. And so I think that all that's happening is that because of the way these platforms are built to capitalize on our desire to stay for more information, we're just spending inordinate amounts of time there. And naturally, as a consequence of that, I think we are listening to the voices we hear there. And people are also, creators, they also prey upon people's natural dispositions, and they recognize that, there's a big controversy in the US right now about autism and Tylenol. And they know that if they go on social media and they say, Tylenol doesn't cause autism, this is so stupid, Donald Trump is an idiot, there's a lot of people out there who are going to be like, wow, this is exactly what I thought and what I wanted to hear, and that's reinforcing my beliefs. Yay, I'm going to like this, I'm going to follow this person. Or if there's other people going, the doctors are now coming out and saying Tylenol doesn't cause autism. Of course they are, because they're trying to protect Big Pharma, and they're all funded by Big Pharma, and we know that Donald Trump is right. There's a huge audience of people who are going to listen to that and say, this is exactly what I thought too, I'm going to follow this person, right? And so we end up getting into these horrible dividing trenches where we're just following our own opinions, and the emotional stakes are rising, because I think when we have the ability to divide us from them, that's something the brain pays a lot of attention to. It's natural. We have these tribalistic tendencies, right? We treat people differently. Our brains treat people differently if they seem to identify as our in-group. And there's literally studies showing that the brain's empathy centers will activate more strongly if someone shares something in common with you. So when someone doesn't, they kind of become dehumanized in your brain, where your brain's empathy centers are not turning on as much. You're not responding quite as much to their emotions. You're not experiencing as much empathy for them. And we have this kind of division, this like political division, leaking into so many different things. I mean, when before has autism or Tylenol been political? And so now you take a completely neutral topic like Tylenol, And then you assign this 50-50 divide where now some people don't believe in Tylenol and some people do believe in Tylenol. And when you encounter someone with that different opinion, it raises to your awareness the division between you and them. They are the outgroup. Therefore, my empathy is going to shut down. It's easier for me to be hostile to them because I don't feel the guilt of their pain inflicting back onto me, because that's what empathy does. It makes us feel other people's emotions. And we just end up in this increasingly hateful, divided world because all these topics that should not be political are becoming political. And social media is, actually, I published a paper a couple of years ago where I called it this hypothesis, the virtual disengagement hypothesis, referring to the idea that the brain's empathy centers they disengage or they shut down when we are online because we don't have social cues to inform them. Because that's basically how the brain's empathy centers work. When we see facial expressions, we hear vocal tone, we take in body language, we have all these social cues that tell our brains, this is a human being in front of me and they are experiencing these emotions. And so therefore you are going to take on some of those emotions yourself. But when we don't have that online, we don't have those social cues, our brains are like 99% of human existence, we have interacted face to face. Our brains are not designed to detect that a social entity is on the other side of this text on my phone screen. And so it's very natural and kind of predictable that we would experience less empathy online, which I argue in the paper could explain the extreme levels of hostility and division we see online. So then you take all this political division and allow people to interact more and more online and choose their in-groups and cater or tailor their social media feeds to feed them exactly what their disposition tells them is true. And you just get even more division and hate. And I think that this is really at the core of our big social problem in America right now, because a lot more of our interactions with the world around us and our fellow Americans are happening in these contexts where there's little empathy and we see people for whether they identify with us or not. I think we are collectively, bit by bit, losing this sense of identifying with like humanity in general, right? Like the amount of the world that we identify with is shrinking by day as we're finding new reasons to separate from others, Tylenol, autism, right? All these different things. And I think that is causing a lot of underlying issues because social connection is extremely important for our well-being and isolation is extremely bad for us. So I just have a lot of thoughts on this, and I hate to be over here slamming the bell, like the alarm bell, right? But this is kind of how I see the world, like I mentioned in the beginning that my training is the lens through which I see the world. And when I see, political division in America, I see less healthy brains. And when I see people interacting online, I see the absence of social cues. Yeah, all these things have kind of informed my perspective on what's wrong today. And again, that's why I wrote the book, because I'm hoping that if someone reads the book, they will recognize, oh yeah, there's these flaws in the world. And now that I'm aware of them, I might actually try and tailor my life a little bit differently so that I can have a better existence and a healthier existence.
Can you give an example of how you would teach somebody to improve empathy?
Yeah, there's actually trainings that have been tested and shown to enhance empathy. So I'll give you two of them. The first is it's called an affect dyad. So the idea is you have two people, you're sitting together face to face, and one person starts by telling the story of something that happened to them in the last day or two, something emotional, something that was impactful for them. It could be good or bad. It doesn't really matter, but it should be substantial, right? It's not just oh, I went to the grocery store. It's this person stepped on my foot and then started yelling at me, something like that, right? And the other person's job is to do absolutely nothing but listen. They just look at the person. They listen intently. They do not interrupt. They don't even have to respond with cues or anything. They're just listening. And they're working hard to really embody the emotions of what the person is describing. And the person describing should be as descriptive as possible. Oh, I felt like this in this moment. And then I started to wonder if this was happening. And you as the listener are just listening. And then you switch. And so that exercise, as you can imagine, is supportive of building empathy because you are literally just for a few minutes doing nothing but practicing empathy. It's you're doing bicep curls, but for the brain areas that drive empathy. And then another example of a practice that you can try is called a loving kindness meditation. And this one's great because it's a meditation. You could literally you can go to YouTube right now and Google loving kindness meditation and find one. And the concept is that you imagine a person, and that person can be a stranger, that can be a close friend, it could be a sibling. It's usually easiest to start with someone you really care about. And all you're doing is you're imagining extending feelings of love and kindness, loving kindness meditation, to this person. You are just sending them warmth, you are sending them care, and you're experiencing, you're just relishing that feeling of wanting the best for someone and hoping that they're doing well. And then what you can do is, let's say the first time you did it with your mom. Super easy to do. You love your mom, you have a great relationship. Okay, now what about you try your sister, who you don't really get along with as well? You get there, you get to the point of being able to do it. Okay, now what about trying your neighbor, who you've never actually talked to, but what you have noticed about them is that they are of a different religious faith and that they are of a different political party. They've, someone who you normally would not extend this kind of feeling to, you practice that. And with time, you may be able to strengthen the ability to overcome our brain's urges to discount the empathy we experience for people who are different or people who we don't particularly like. And there's a study that looked at those two tasks along with a few other tasks, and they found that at the end of the trial, I think it was 90 days of doing this daily, the people not only experienced greater empathy and compassion, but they also had literally thickened certain parts of the brain that are associated with empathy. They literally built new neural hardware to allow them to perform these actions. And that's pretty powerful. And it also tells us that empathy is not necessarily hard set. We can always change it in either direction, and there are also experiences that are associated with a loss of empathy, like going through medical school, interestingly, because you are exposed to the pain and suffering of people in hospitals every day. And your brain is like, this is too painful. It's actually adaptive to sort of shrink back a bit and not take on people's emotions as much. And so it's actually been shown that as students go through medical school, their empathy declines. So we are flexible. Our empathy is shaped generally through early life, but even in adulthood, it remains adaptive.
That is honestly terrifying to hear that about, but it makes sense. I mean, dissociation helps. I write a lot and talk about how dissociation is not a bad thing. Oftentimes it can help you. It can be adaptive, but just Vision Like Yanni has a great loving kindness meditation on YouTube. If you're looking for a specific one, it's one that I recommend. Question I have for you is, we have an entire group of humans that practice empathy constantly. I feel like therapists and social workers. I remember getting trained in IFS. I have internal family systems as a type of psychotherapy. That's what I'm trained in. I could feel my brain getting more empathetic just by having that framework. Is there any data on that kind of stuff? Or being, the big thing IFS considers is curiosity, being curious and compassionate with someone else, whether or not, there's got to be a reason that they got to the perspective that they have, even if they're in my out group. Is there any data on that kind of stuff for therapists and those types of things?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, not that I'm aware of explicitly looking at that question, but I believe it. I absolutely believe it to be true. I mean, I think that the kind of person who chooses to be a therapist from the beginning must be probably more empathic than the average person, right? Because you care about others. And that may also be true for doctors as well, right? For medical, physicians, right? They may lose some of their empathy in medical training, but they probably start out wanting to help others or wanting to make a large salary. There's also that possibility. Yeah, I mean, IFS, I will say I have been the recipient of IFS as a patient, and that stuff is amazing. I'm a big fan of IFS.
Let's go. I love that.
Yeah.
It helps you kind of build the kinds of connections you're describing within yourself, with your parts. So
yeah, right. Self-empathy.
So I think it's so powerful. Yeah. We need more self-energy in the world. That's interesting. Let's talk real quick about, we've mentioned this a couple times, but I want to go all the way in. The autism versus Tylenol. Before we have to land the plane here, you talked about how it's 50-50. It either is a thing or not a thing, but we know that's not how science works. It's supported, not supported, all this kind of. How did they get to the perspective that Tylenol is the cause of autism? And then just elucidate some of the data and what you know.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, I can't answer the first one because I have absolutely no idea how they got there. I genuinely don't. And I don't even know if that's public knowledge at this point, whether they've released anything. But here's the thing. And just before I go any further, I do, just for the listener and for both of you, I want to make it clear, what I'm about to say is not a political stance, right? I am genuinely, I try to be as apolitical as possible and just listen to the data. And so basically I'm about to tell you that there's no link between Tylenol and autism. And that's not me saying, that's not driven by my distaste for Donald Trump or his administration. And I think it's important to recognize that when you hear someone say something like what I'm about to say, it's natural to think they're only saying that because they don't like Trump. But please just take that out of this and just hear what I'm going to say. There may be a study that was run by the administration where they found a correlation between Tylenol and autism prevalence. There may be. I don't know. There is already data from 2.5 million children showing that when you properly control for genetics and like sibling pairs, that the use of Tylenol during pregnancy is not associated with autism. So there's also the point that even if there is evidence, they come out, they say, hey, look, we have a new study, greater Tylenol use is associated with higher risk of autism. Okay, well, maternal immune activation, being sick while pregnant, is a well-known documented risk factor for autism. So if there's a correlation between acetaminophen use and autism, the real correlation might be between the mom was sick and that may have been higher risk of autism, and they happen to also be taking acetaminophen. So there's it happens to be a correlation when it's not truly causative. As a mouse researcher, we want to identify how to induce autism in mice. And as ridiculous as that sounds, if you think about it, it actually makes sense. Because if we want to study this condition in mice, which allows us to ask different questions that we can't study in humans, it is to our benefit if we can find new causes of autism by inducing them in mice. And there are certain drugs that exposure in utero can increase the risk of autism, like an anti-epileptic drug called valproic acid. That's one mouse model of autism. So the pups, babies, are exposed to VPA, valproic acid, and they show a disproportionately high level of social dysfunction when they are grown up and into like adolescence. There's no Tylenol model of autism. No, I don't know if any scientist has ever tested this, but I would imagine that at some point, somewhere, of the thousands of scientists who have ever tried this, they would have tried that, right? Like, again, science is a business. If you can identify things, it supports your career. And the fact that I, as a person who did my entire PhD research in the biological and genetic basis of autism, have never heard about an association between Tylenol and autism, tells me that it's probably not happening. Plus the fact that there's already data on 2.5 million children showing that it's not a risk factor. I don't believe it, and I'm really curious about what the world thinks about this. I coach high school lacrosse, and we had a practice yesterday, and I heard two of the kids talking. They were like 10th graders, and the guy was like, "You hear about Tylenol causes autism?" And I went over, I'm like, "What do you guys think about that?" And then one guy was like, "Dude, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life." And I was like, okay, so you're a 10th grader with obviously no medical training and you think it's stupid. And I keep hearing this echoed, but it's at least reassuring that, just because this is what I mean. We were talking about before the episode started that I worry that we are allowing our political and not even political, just our in-group affiliation to dominate over our evidence-guided beliefs, right? And so it's just concerning to me that, and it could be Joe Biden, it could be Donald Trump, it doesn't matter. But if Donald Trump says, hey, Tylenol causes autism, and then someone listens to this podcast and hears me say, oh, there's actually no link, but they like Donald Trump and they trust Donald Trump, they're probably more likely to listen to that and believe that Tylenol does cause autism. Whereas if in the last administration, if Joe Biden had come out and said Tylenol causes autism, I think a lot of more Democratic voters would have said, hey, I haven't seen the data, but there's got to be something there, right? Like they would be the same people who are arguing against it now would be considering it because we naturally tend to trust the people in our in-group. And that's what I find worrying about America is that, we are letting our affiliations lead and our beliefs lead over our trust meters, right? Like we are no longer looking for, or I'm sorry, not our trust meters, our truth meters. We are no longer looking for evidence. We are simply looking for who said that. If I don't agree with them in general, then I don't think it's true. And that's really also damaging, not just for like the entire culture of the United States, but also for our like need for connection and humanity and community.
If you look at this from a meta perspective, how do you deal with this concept for yourself? What specific things does Dr. Ben do to challenge his in-group bias?
So I try not to search for new information through sources that may be biased. Like the scientific literature, I know there's a lot of people who like argue, oh, like science is biased, it's funded by big pharma. I do not believe that. As a person who has published papers for the last decade, I've never met a researcher who has ever had their research funded by big pharma. I trust the scientific literature as unbiased. It is just data. And so when I do hear someone sharing a perspective, even if it's a person who I'm inclined to listen to and believe because I share a lot in common with them, I'm still cautious about taking in information. I'm not just going to automatically assume that something is true. And I'll admit, like, I am totally not perfect. I have been burned by that in the past, by just blindly accepting some information is true, but I'm always trying to interrogate information and challenge my own biases. And in addition to that, I'm also trying to offer as much grace to people who my brain naturally wants to exclude. Like just recognizing the fact that my brain may show less activity in these empathy-related brain areas to a person standing next to me on the sidewalk if I notice that they are wearing a chain of a religious emblem that I don't identify with. Like, just being aware of that allows me to like step back from my natural dispositions and my instincts and realize, okay, if I wasn't aware of that, I would probably act differently towards this person, but I don't have to act differently towards this person, right? And, there's so many tiny little decisions in life that we may not even be aware of, where in that moment, the bus pulls up and normally I would let the person go ahead of me, but instead I think, screw that person. I don't identify with them. I'm going to go in front of them and be rude, right? Like tiny little things like that we don't even realize are happening, but you can just as easily override those impulses, right? Like we are tribalistic animals. We come from a world, an ancient world, where it was in our best interest to protect and identify with the people in our tribe and to sort of disengage from people in other tribes. If they die, I don't care. It's actually good for me if they die. But if people in my tribe die, that's really bad for my survival because now I've just lost one ally and my survival is now at risk. So humans have been selected through evolution to care more about people who are identifying in our group. And so just simply being aware of that, I think, is helpful, but you can override it. I'm going to choose to care about this person. I'm going to choose to empathize with this person. I mean, we have this ability called cognitive empathy, which is the ability to put yourself into the mind space of someone and understand what they're going through. There's also emotional empathy, which is when you share their emotions, and cognitive empathy can sort of be used as a bridge to emotional empathy. So if you see someone suffering because they're very different from you and you feel nothing, you're totally capable of looking at them and saying, okay, what are they experiencing? What would I experience in that? Like what's their mind state? What are they probably thinking? What are they probably feeling? Okay, now how would I feel if I were in their shoes? How would I feel if it wasn't this person I was watching, but if it was my spouse or my child going through what they're going through? Can I start to embody their emotions a bit more? And I think at any time we have this human like override. We are super complicated, sophisticated brains. And so, we are capable of so much more than we often allow ourselves to achieve because we just fall prey to these like ancient instincts without really even noticing that they're there. And so that's also something that I wanted to, clarify in the book and whenever I have the opportunity to. So thanks for giving me the opportunity on this podcast.
Yeah. You mentioned IFS, just one last question, that you've been a participant of that. Something that I see in people, my clients that I work with inside of their relationships is that parts language helps them with this a lot. And so I work in the relationship and dating space a lot. And so it's like my partner is this or is mad at me or like yelled at me, shifting to a part of them or a part of this other person is behaving this way, but it's not who they are as a human. And the connection between us is we share humanity, but a part of them is acting differently. Has that helped you at all? Or do you think about that when you're trying to be more empathetic?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think what we've gotten really good at lately, which is a bad thing, is if we see someone do something or say something that we disagree with, we completely write them off. And that happens a lot on social media, right? Where it's like you follow someone for a year and then you see them tweet something and you're like, oh my God, I completely disagree. Unfollowed, right? Or you might even comment and be like, screw you. I thought you were a nice person, but I don't trust you anymore, right? We do this where we generalize a belief or something we observe to represent the entirety of that person. And that's totally not true, and if you were to sit down and have a long conversation with that person, there's probably a lot you would have in common. And then that one idea you would not have in common. And that's entirely okay, right? I think we've gotten so polarized that we just exclude ideas that we don't agree with. And that's not a good thing, because if you think about it, I guarantee that some of the people who are closest to you in your life don't agree with you on everything, right? I'm sure you might disagree with your parents or your siblings or your spouse or some of your closest friends on certain things. I know that me and some of my best friends in this world totally disagree politically. That's fine. I don't care, right? And I think that actually my brain is probably better for it, for having allowed them into my life, because it's showing my brain that there's less of a threat out there, right? People can disagree with you and still be allies. And I think when we exclude that from our lives and we say anybody who disagrees in any capacity is an enemy, suddenly we have a lot of enemies. And that's not what the brain wants. The brain wants to be safe and surrounded by community. And lo and behold, being more isolated is associated with higher rates of suicide and depression and anxiety. Perhaps it's because our ancient instincts are to be supported by our communities. And when we don't have them, we start to get concerned. And, I try to do the opposite of that,
I love that. I think it's different too when you walk outside too. I walk into a coffee shop and most people say hi. Most people are kind. Most people are not like, oh, you freaking white dude, I hate you type of thing. Like that's the other thing that the social media online stuff messes with people's brains, I feel like.
Yeah.
In a way.
Social media makes it feel like you're going to walk into the coffee shop and everyone's going to be arguing about Charlie Kirk's shooting, right? Like that's not how real life is, right? And it's probably because we are disengaging our empathy, and so we don't give a shit about what the other person's feeling. And we say things that we would never say in real life because we're completely disengaged emotionally. But the world's actually pretty nice. When you go out there, people are actually pretty kind, and the interactions you have can be very satisfying. And I bet when you do go into the coffee shop and you pass someone or you're walking by them on the sidewalk and you say, hey, good morning, and they say, hey, good morning, you probably feel really good. You probably feel very safe and very reassured. And I think that's kind of what we're missing out on a lot, because we're receding away from a world that we fear doesn't support us anymore. And by simply making a small effort to reconnect with your community, I think you could notice dramatic effects in your well-being, if only for the fact that it's proven that social interactions make us feel better.
Dude, couldn't agree more. I'm the worst person to be in an elevator with, because I'm the dude that's like, oh, how's your day? It was all right. Oh, just all right. And I'm getting 3 or 4 questions deep in 11 floors from ground floor.
You're like, let's do some IFS.
Dude, I want to talk about it, and you can help me understand this. Is it not give them, like when you ask a question like that, does it not give them a boost in that beautiful chemical cocktail for the rest of the day when you do that for someone else?
Maybe, I don't know about the rest of the day, but like there's a bunch of studies showing that people feel better right after they interact. And it doesn't matter if you could be tracking someone's behavior for a couple days and you notice that after they have organic interactions, like they happen to be riding in the elevator with someone, they will say, oh, I feel a lot better right now for some reason. Or if you tell them, hey, go interact with that person over there on the train, they will feel better afterwards. And so not only, to your point, not only does the person who started the conversation feel better, but the person who was the recipient. So like there's literally studies. There's this Professor Nicholas Epley, who I just love his research because he has people do this in real life settings like trains and buses and taxis. And he'll have them start a conversation with a stranger. And by the way, they almost always underestimate the impact of it. They say, this is really probably not going to really do anything. I'm not going to feel much better after. They feel great afterwards. And then when the researchers go up to the stranger and say, hey, how was that? They're like, that was actually really nice. I really enjoyed the experience of my commute to work way better having this conversation with a stranger. So yeah, you're not just benefiting yourself. You're also like spreading the wealth to whoever you choose to engage.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I've got a bro science version of this as well, because Dr. Zach, we've talked about him a couple of times. He has a consumer app called Six that uses biometric devices. He's done 21,000 blood draws to measure blood oxytocin after like social interaction and stuff. And the app tracks your key moments using biometric like data. And something I noticed was when I went from normal weightlifting to now doing CrossFit in a social setting, I get so many key moments when I'm at CrossFit, because it tracks my time, or it tracks the time you get in and what you're doing. And it's just like, whoa, social interaction is so important for like oxytocin and all this really cool stuff that like is being released real time. So
yeah,
kind of bro science.
The Six app blows my mind too, because I think they identified some heart marker. It was like it's a cardiac marker and some change in pulse rate or whatever it is that is a secondary indicator of oxytocin. And that's how it can be done through like a chest strap, right? Or a wristband or...
Yeah, Whoop, anything. Garmin, Whoop, Apple Watch, Fitbit, any of them. Like Chloe and I did content for them for years. Like I love them. Like
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, they're great. I love that. So I digress. All right, let's bring this thing in for a landing. Last question we ask everybody is, what's a question that you wish you got asked more often?
I mean, this is kind of sad, but you already hit it. I think that question of how are you doing in the beginning, right? Like what a nice question. And yeah, I'm not getting asked that much these days, but I appreciate it. I mean, I think, gosh, there's so many ways I could answer this question in reality, and I really don't know which to choose. I mean, I think I'll settle on my first answer. I appreciate that you guys genuinely ask me how I'm doing, and I think that in itself is a great model of like human interaction, right? I think we do so much of this, I don't know, how's your day? Whatever, small talk stuff, right? But asking someone like in a genuine way, how are you? How have you been? What's going on? What's on your mind? Immediately leaps straight past all the small talk into depth. And and I was immediately comfortable giving you a genuine answer. So, I appreciate that. And amid all the podcasts I do, this is the only time I've ever been asked that on a podcast. So even beforehand, like even before the recording starts, like no one's ever asking that, right? So thank you. I genuinely appreciate it.
Anytime. It's interesting, and maybe you can comment on this, that we hear this response on the podcast 99% of the time from men. Women have all different things and stuff like that. And this totally anecdotal. We've only had, it said like, I get this, a small samples, all the stuff. However, it's interesting. Guys say this: I want people to ask me how I'm doing, actually care, and actually go like more in depth. Like, I wonder if we asked your wife, for example, if people were asking her how she's doing, and if would she say the same thing? Like, do you have any thoughts on that, or is there any research or anything around that you know about?
No, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting anecdote. I am a guy. I can understand and relate to what you're saying for sure.
Me too.
I think in my particular case, there's also the added context that my wife is 8.5 months pregnant. And so whenever people see me, they're like, how's Bella? Right. And to be sure, she has the hard part of the pregnancy, right? Like she is going through what I am not going through. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just funny. It's such a unique circumstance, as we talked about at the beginning, that this huge personal family moment is happening at the exact same time as arguably the most busy and intense section of my career. And, this book launch is like such a significant milestone and something that like, it's important that it goes well for me. And, just for the sake of my career and my life and also my family, right? There's a lot hanging on it. And so, yeah, like I don't know, I'm facing unique challenges of the synergy of these things. I don't know. It's interesting to hear that other men have said the same thing because, I don't know, I'm cautious about making hypotheses here, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
It is. It is indeed. All right, let the people know a little bit about where they can find you. I think most people know where they can find you, but and then talk a little bit about the book, how people can get it. Like, I'm excited to read it. I can't wait to get it, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, so my name is... You can find me through my name, Ben Rhine, Rein. On social media, I'm Dr. Ben Rhine. My website is benrhine.com. If you want to read my scientific papers, if you want to contact me, that's a good place to go, straight to the website. But I do also post short form videos on social media about neuroscience. And so that's on like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and all that. The book is called Why Brains Need Friends, and it comes out October 14th. And it can be found basically anywhere. If right now, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but if right now is before October 14th, it is available for pre-order, which means it'll just show up at your door on October 14th. But yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of the book is to answer the title question: why do brains need friends? What does socializing do for us? What does isolation? How does it act against us biologically? Like, what's actually happening when you connect with someone and when you fail to prioritize connection? I address some of these like core brain flaws. We have a lot of flaws built into our brains in terms of how we connect and that hold us back from connection. So some of the things that we talked about here of like just recognizing that these things exist can help you. And then that's all like kind of part one of the book. And then part two is like taking this fundamental knowledge and applying it in the modern world. So there's a chapter on like virtual versus in-person interactions. There's a chapter on likability. There's a chapter on how various drugs that we take regularly influence the social brain in our interactions. There's a chapter on dogs and what they do for the brain. So, and how they can be valuable members of your life in terms of like feeding your brain social nourishment. So there's a lot to it. And it's basically like, again, me taking everything I ever learned in my academic career as a neuroscientist that I thought the average person would be better off knowing and smashing it all together into one book. And so I'm in this weird stage right now where the book's not out and I don't know what people think about it, but the few people who have read it have said really, really nice things. So I'm just really excited to like get past this purgatory I'm in of waiting for it to happen and waiting for it to come out and just share it with the world. And I really genuinely, more than anything, I hope that it inspires people to reconnect with others and that it might heal just a little bit of this divide that we're facing, because that truly is my deeper motivation. Is I'm worried about especially America. So maybe it'll do a little bit to inject some glue back into our society.
Going to be at a better time. I'm excited. I'm pretty sure I got signed up to get an early copy too. So like,
you will. Very soon.
Yes, I cannot wait to read it. I love reading. I'm a voracious reader, so I'm really pumped for that. Cool. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with us. Any last thoughts or anything else you want to leave us with? Or
no, I don't think so. I mean, I just appreciate this conversation and the ability to express freely. And it's the internet. Hopefully, I haven't offended anybody with my stances here. My opinions. But I don't know. I guess it is what it is, and that's what I believe. So There it is.
Try to challenge your in-group bias if you're feeling that way at the current moment, everyone. I still love you, so it's all good, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for hopping on. Like, this has been an awesome episode. If you like this no BS approach to wellness, I would suggest you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if there's an expert you want us to talk to next, hit us up on Instagram or hit us up on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time on the Decision Lab. Peace.
Bye, everyone.